Welcome back. Coming up, we are going to talk about the mayor's race. Clive Doucette challenging Jim Watson. There were others who were in the mix as well. We'll talk about how interesting that was, whether anything surprising will come from the mayor's race. We'll get to that in just a few minutes, but we're going to talk more about some of the municipal wards in Ottawa and how they might turn out in Monday's election. So let's turn to some of the races where the incumbents face some strong challenges. And Steve, we can maybe start with you because the ward that you used to represent, Gloucester South Nepean, there is an interesting race there. Michael Kakish, who succeeded you as city councillor, is facing a tough challenge from Carol-Ann Meehan, former broadcaster. Yeah, I think so. Carol, you know, one of the advantages that an incumbent has is name recognition. And Carol-Ann brings that to the table, right? Not only has she been involved in the community, but she is a well-known face. And so I think that gives her some advantage. She still needs to translate that into knocking on doors and talking to as many residents as she can, which I think she has. Harpreet Singh is also running a very strong campaign there. And that doesn't help an incumbent when you have, I think, two credible candidates going door to door hard, raising concerns and raising issues and raising doubt in the voters' mind that you know, the ward is in the best hands. Michael's also defending some issues in terms of his spending with his office budget, which the other candidates have been raising. So I would put that as one to watch, and I know certainly people are talking about, neighbors are talking about it. Yeah. Sue, that is also your ward, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
That is the place where you ran 4 years ago. So give us your quick thoughts on that one.
Well, I mean, I don't want to pretend otherwise. Obviously, I don't have an affection for Michael Kakish. I didn't like the way he campaigned, and I don't like the way he's been spending our money on vanity bus ads. It's interesting to me that Steve is suggesting it could hurt Michael Kakish that there are two strong candidates against him. I think that's going to help him, and that's my concern. I think Carol-Ann, while she doesn't have that political experience, really cares about the ward. She's lived there for more than 20 years. She's out campaigning. She's going door to door. I know she has Steve's support. She's got Jan Harder's support, Lisa McLeod's support. These are people who live in the ward and know these people. So I'm certainly crossing my fingers for her. I'm crossing my fingers for her. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Jonathan, give us your thoughts. And again, as somebody who's been looking at all the wards, give us a rundown of where you think the incumbent candidates are most at risk.
Well, Gloucester South Nepean definitely is the case. Coming into the election, he needed to be challenged. I didn't think that he had really accomplished as much as a councillor should accomplish, and he had the whole thing with the spending on the bus shelter ads. The other wards where I think there's a very, very good chance of an incumbent losing is Stittsville. Glenn Gower, I think, should defeat Shad Kadri, and he's the only other person in the race. Yeah. 4 years ago, Dave Lee had a pretty good showing, and I didn't think Dave Lee was the strongest candidate. There's been a lot of little bit of unrest, some low-key unrest out there, and Glenn's very, very prominent, very active in the community, so I would expect him to win.
And he has the advantage of being the only candidate running against the incumbent, and you almost need that if you're going to unseat an incumbent, right?
Yeah, because vote splitting and sort of the anti-incumbent route can be an issue. I live in Capital Ward, and I think that David Chernyshenko is in a lot of trouble. I've been hearing within the community and from the various neighborhoods within the ward a lot of dissatisfaction for the past few years. And you know, there are 3 or 4 strong candidates going up against him. So that sort of shows you that there's a lot of sort of desire for change, and they're not just spouting things about, you know, we need change, we need change. They do have ideas, they do have platforms that are put out there. I think his chance of winning is for a vote split, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to come down to Christine McAllister and Sean Menard, and probably whoever gets most of the people out. McAllister declared much earlier than Menard, so she has a big advantage there. She was at the Glebe Community Association, so it's probably going to be very tight. Alta Vista is the other one that's pretty big. Again, 3 strong challengers going after an embattled incumbent. And with the so-called...
That incumbent being Jean Cloutier.
Yeah, with the so-called Cloutier tax and with what's happened at Herringate, there are big issues there. But again, will they split it? I think that Raylene Lang-Dion probably is the leading candidate to defeat him if he gets defeated. She was sort of really out and prominent first. But Kevin Kidd and Clinton Cowan and everybody else with a K sound in their name have deep roots in those communities and have some name recognition. Clinton Cowan came second last time around, so they could draw off some vote. And then there are a few sort of more dark horse ones, like could Jay Tizick take down George DeRuse in Osgood? I'm hearing there's a good chance of that. Is Riley Brockington as safe as we all thought when his competitor, Fabian Kalala-Simonkinda, has gotten some pretty big endorsements and some momentum, and there's been some bad press for Brockington.
That's in River Ward.
That's in River Ward, sorry, yes. So I think that those people could be challenged too. I don't know about Rito Vania. I thought that Fleury was probably going to be pretty safe, but Thierry Harris has run a solid campaign, and there's always some discontent in Rito Vania, it seems, for the past 8 years, but it's never clear that it's enough to actually defeat him.
Yeah. All right. Sue, what's your assessment on some of those races that Jonathan just identified?
I agree with absolutely all of them. I know everyone that I'm talking to knows about what they call the Little effect, when Sean Little, who was a downtown councillor, proved himself not to be up for the job, and so many people were unhappy with his performance that too many people ran. Yeah. And he won. That's my concern. I mean, I'm sorry, when I look at Riley Brockington, I just don't feel he serves this community, and the thought that he might win is, like, difficult for me to accept. David Chernishenko, I feel the same way. As many have said, he's a lovely guy, but he's not doing his job. He's not doing his job for the city. He's, the head of environment. He used to complain about Maria McRae not doing enough. The guy hasn't, in my mind, has just not done enough for the environment, which for me is like a key issue. But again, sadly, in our democracy, which I certainly support, the number of people running in every ward is going to dictate who wins.
Yeah. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, some good observations, and I think Alta Vista is interesting. And on the way here, I heard that Raylene Dion had an endorsement, I think, from a chap named Howard, who has been leading the charge on the concern over the development there. And
Paul Howard?
Yes. If that's true, then I think that shows that some people are starting to rally behind her, and she might be building some momentum. What I think is interesting is Kitchissippi is not in the mix. Usually that has been traditionally a ward where an incumbent will serve one term, unless in the case of Sean Little, there's such a division that the person wins with a very, very low amount, less than 20% potentially. But that doesn't look like it's going to be the case here. So the incumbent likely has done a good job there, I would suggest, because that ward continues to be under tremendous growth pressure, and that is usually what leads to the demise of a city councillor, that they just cannot get on the winning side of the development in that area, and as a result, there's frustration. I think you're also seeing in that ward that people have moved in there. They moved into to the buildings that people were once opposed to, and so they believe in kind of the Kitchissippi that is presently. So they're not a 20, 30-year person that really objects to the change. They're a person that's lived there maybe 2 or 3 years. They're comfortable with the growth. They like the Kitchissippi that they see. So I just find it's interesting that race, I think traditionally we'd be putting on the table, and likely we're not this time.
Yeah. Were there any other candidates that we haven't mentioned so far that impressed you during the course of this campaign, Jonathan? Anybody else who stood out, who maybe isn't even going to get elected this time around, but ran a good campaign?
I was impressed with Lauren Neufeld in Canada North. I don't think he's going to challenge with Suds and Gourlay and Muirhead, but he came onto the scene and he was promoting transit and accessibility issues because he's legally blind. And sometimes we see people who have sort of the one issue that they want to push, and they sort of get just trapped into that. But he's not. He's got a really good idea of where the city and where the ward should go, and he's a tremendous advocate for transit because obviously he has to use it. He joked on your debate that that the city doesn't want people like him driving. And speaking of transit activists, I'll go back to Alta Vista. John Reddens ran 4 years ago, and he didn't really challenge. And then he ran again this year. And I found he's a much stronger candidate this year. He had a more well-rounded vision, more well-rounded platform, and he's been really active for these past 4 years. He's a community activist. He's out there. He's with Acorn. He's at City Council. He's talking about transit issues and affordable housing and all this stuff. And I think after his run 4 years ago, he's become a better candidate this time around. And I think he became a better activist for the last 4 years. It's really sort of grown into that. And I'm very impressed with what he's put together.
All right, Sue, on the question of campaign donations, that has become a bit of a thing, especially in the later stages of this campaign, because several candidates have voluntarily disclosed their donation lists in the days leading up to the actual vote. They're not required to do that until after the election, of course, but some of them felt strongly that they wanted the community to know who was donating to their campaign before they cast their ballots. What impact do you think that has had on the race, and do you think that's something that should be required going forward?
Well, this has been very difficult for me because I have always been one of those who have advocated that. I think last time it was like a $750 donation, and I always advocated that kind of money doesn't influence people, and I preferred that everyone be upfront about it. What I used to always say is, like, if Minto makes a $750 donation, and then 20 people from Minto make a donation, most people don't know who those people are. And so I preferred that it all be transparent. I have to say, so I had this aha moment when it kills me to say that Alex Cullen was right. That just drives me nuts. But I was thinking about it a lot recently and thought, I don't take a cup of coffee from a councillor. And why don't I take a cup of coffee? Because I just don't. I don't want any exchange of any financial anything. And then I thought, well, if I'm not doing that, then, maybe Alex Cullen has been right all along, which I, really
and not taking donations from developers, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, yes, I'm not influenced by a cup of coffee or anything else, but if I'm not taking a cup of coffee, then I don't really think that, I think it's been such a grassroots movement of people. I mean, the landscape has totally changed. Everyone's declaring, or people who care about this issue are declaring their donations, and I'm totally on board.
All right. Steve, very quickly, your thoughts on this, just 30 seconds.
I think in some wards it's an issue, and if that's an issue for the residents, then I think the candidates should respond to it. I think we have to think twice about asking for that system-wide. We want people to run and make it easy for people to run. There's a lot of things to do, Sue, as a candidate, in terms of signs and fundraising and talking to media and talking to as many residents as possible. So to have an extra requirement that you'd have to report all your donors before the poll is actually held, I think adds a layer of complexity to a campaign that at a municipal level, I think we want to make it easier to be a candidate, not harder.
I'm not even saying before the election, although I think it's a nice trend, and I just do have to do one caveat. People are going to have to accept that if we're going to forbid these kind of donations and force people to even, say, well, I took a donation from someone who works for Minto, that is only going to benefit the incumbent, and that's still my big concern.
Right. Okay. Mayor Jim Watson is seeking a third term as mayor of Ottawa. How likely is it that it will happen? Is there any doubt left at all? And what will that next term look like? Will some city councillors start to challenge what some people describe as the iron grip that Jim Watson has had on city council over the last 8 years? We'll talk about that when we come back.